Well, that's basically what we're sinking our teeth into this morning. The implications of the summit, what exactly African leaders will be going back to their respective countries with. And this morning we're speaking with somebody who has very clear ideas on what summits like this should produce for not just Africa, but individual countries within the African continent. And of course, France. We have joining us all the way from Ibadan, the Oyo State capital, Professor Oyebanji Oyelaran Oyeyinka, who is a scholar and researcher professor in economics, innovation, and technology management. I do know that he used to advise the president of the African Development Bank. It's good to have you with us this morning, Prof. I'm sure that you must have been watching very keenly activities happening in Nairobi, Kenya, and you must have had perhaps initial fears, or perhaps you were also with optimism. I'm unclear what it will be, but I know that you're a scholar, a student of history, and of course, a professor who has studied development all of his life. So you must have very clear ideas of what summits like this should produce. But myself and Ayo yesterday took up a guest on the fact that this is another France, or not another power versus and Africa summit, as if Africa were a country by itself. I don't know what your thoughts were when you initially heard about this Africa Forward Summit.
No, thank you very much, Pope. Thank you, Ayo. Always a pleasure to be with you. I'm never a fan of this kind of conferences, but this is the world we live in. I'm glad on one hand that it's taking place on the African soil, not somewhere in Europe. So I always find it a bit difficult to swallow when I see 50 African heads of state running around to some country in Asia or in Africa, in Europe. But at least this is taking place in Nairobi, where I used to live. I lived there for 10 years. My apprehension mostly is always about what comes next. What do we get out of this? You know, I've been in international development for many years. I spent 20 years in the UN, several years at the Africa Development Bank. And at the end of the day, actually, the real action is always on the ground, at home. What do we do with all the resolutions? And for the most part, I'm sorry to say, especially, for example, if you look at the climate negotiation, at the end of the day, very little action follows. The big powers always sort of accept very reluctantly the positions of Africa because of what I call the geo-economics of our dynamics. Africa, for them, have very little leverage with big powers. We don't have the leverage. Oftentimes I feel that we are taken for granted. So for me, the real issue in this 21st century will be for Africa itself to wake up, for us to sit down and really develop our continent. I mean, you've seen all that has happened since the second coming of Mr. Trump. Basically, it's clear to all of us that the whole geopolitical architecture has changed. The economic architecture and also the financial framework has changed. Aid is gone. So Africa needs to position itself in a place where we attract real investment into manufacturing, into industry, the sector that will create jobs for our people. So for the most part, I think this is really what African nations need to do. And few of the countries have actually tried to show some leadership. Nigeria is a big country. We should be at the head of this. And I believe that we can do far more than we're doing now to show leadership. We shouldn't be a beggar nation as a country. We shouldn't be a beggar region. We should exploit what God has given us, all the mineral resources, all the agricultural resources, to achieve all the 7 pillars that I see at this summit. whether it's green growth, whether it's agribusiness, whether it's minerals. So we have leverage in those areas. Where we don't, where we fall short is the technological capacity to actually develop all this. Because whatsoever you have, what natural capital you have that is under the ground, it doesn't count much. If you have, let's say alumina under the ground, you have bauxite under the ground until you turn it to alumina and aluminium, it doesn't count for anything. So the real challenge is for Africa to double its efforts and to actually, by whatever means possible, to acquire the technological capability through leadership so that we add value to what God has given us. We have a lot in this continent. I think that's really where we fall short. The real difference between us and them is technology.
Indeed, technology. Some people also say perhaps leadership. I do not know if you will agree with that as well.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Because it is leadership that will help bring about, this development which we require, and also bring forth the technology. Maybe we can even develop it ourselves. Who knows? But some people say, what's the need reinventing the wheel if it already exists? You just have to find ways to be able to adapt it. I see that you shared the reluctance of the pessimism a number of people already have when they see this sort of thing, Africa and whatever country or whatever power summit. And you did say that you're always not happy when you see African leaders. And this criticism has been long running. This criticism that is always Africa and one country. As if Africa were a country. Africa is not a country. It's made up of numerous countries, and you have different countries, gathering in that particular, different leaders of those countries. I wonder sometimes if our leaders have listened to this particular criticism, if they think it is worthwhile at all, and why you think it keeps happening. Why do you think that we keep having summits like this despite the criticism?
No, okay, I think, there's a lot of historical reasons. For the most part, big powers use bilateral relationships to divide us. When Africa, there's 54 African countries to the AU mechanism, for example, you take a position on something, the next thing you know, phones are ringing in the night. The president of one European country call another one call another one, and then the same result we get all the time. So it's about bilateral relationship that undermines the collective will of African heads of state. So I'm sure they know. And I don't want to use the word embarrassing. For most Africans who have the pride in their continent, for me, I always find it very embarrassing. You have, old men running around either in Washington or wherever, and the true embarrassment comes from what happens next. You can point to very little over time on this big summit. In fact, I stopped going to climate summits while I was at the UN at the bank for many years. I just don't go anymore. I'm supposed to go, but I always find an excuse not to go because I feel very uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, all the negotiations, the running around, and these things can be extremely intense, by the way.
It is interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, Prof. It is interesting that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was there, and he did point to the fact that we're living in a world, the way the world is organized right now, Africa was not taken into the equation. He made mention of that, and he also mentioned the fact that we're not even we're not a permanent member. We don't have a permanent member on the UN Security Council. Those are some of the obstacles. William Ruto was quite, forthright in his acknowledgement of the challenges that Africa faces, the biases that are already obstacles that are already placed before African countries. Do you think that such admissions like this and maybe quiet lobbying, so to speak, chips away at the arrogance of old powers as to what exactly really needs to be done if we're really going to be having a meeting of equals?
Yeah. So, no, you got it correctly. And I feel, I may be wrong, it's not going to change soon. Africa is not factored into anything. And that's the truth. When you look at all the declarations, all of the plans, as an academic, I look through the fine details of analysis. When you talk about relationships, say, for example, I mean, look at how much the U.S. spent in Israel. Of course, fighting alongside with Israel and Iran. It's enormous. It's inconceivable that they will even put a fraction of that into any African continent. They don't regard us. That's the truth. And what should be the solution? Africa should get wealthy. You know, the only reason why folks pay attention to Asia now is because after the war, 80 years ago, Asia intentionally, systematically began to accumulate the same technological products that the old powers had. And through it, they became major exporters of manufactured goods, because that's where you make money. China is the epitome of that. No one can ignore China today, you know, because of what I call geo-economics. You know, people speak a lot about geopolitical power, but the subtle power of geoeconomics is the only language that anyone in the world, that's the only thing that they factor in. For example, all the influence of China in the world today in Africa, they have never taken a shot at any country. What is it? Geoeconomics. You know, they give aid here, they build the AU headquarters here, they build here, they give loans at concessional rate, 1-2%. That's geoeconomics. They have used that soft power to gain a foothold everywhere, whether in Asia, whether in Africa. So that's a language. That's a language they've never gone to invade any country. But they use this sort of power. So this is, Africa must just accumulate wealth. Africa must free itself of the trap of poverty. Whenever you are poor, they call you shithole, they call you all manner of names. You know, for me, it's the only solution.
The question, yes. The question then is how? The president at that same conference was quoted as saying that the international financial structure as currently constituted is an instrument of industrial disarmament for Africa. We also know that African summits date back to 1964 at the very least in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And we have had several. Malcolm mentioned the other time that we had several. I can count 14, you know, just by one simple search of such, summits and conferences that we have had with other world powers. So the question to the issue you have raised, Prof, is how? It's interesting that Africa itself hasn't even had this conference among itself. We had this conversation recently, Prof, when industrialists in Africa, including your former principal, Dr. Adesina, said that it was cheaper to do business with Europe in terms of exporting than it is to do business among Africans, even among the sub-Saharan West Africa. So if Africa is finding it difficult to do business with itself, how can it rise to the level of geopolitics, the geoeconomics that you're talking about?
No, you are very correct. And I think the establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I'm a member of the Industrialization Committee. It's probably one of the boldest initiatives that Africa has taken. 1.3 billion people, 3.5 trillion in terms of overall GDP. It is massive, and we have to push it. So the argument has always been, if we want to trade with the world, because right now trade among the AFCT is about 15 to 18%, and compare that to Europe among themselves about 60, 70%. And the trade, when you look at the numbers, is always in the manufactured goods. This is extremely very important for people to take note of. It's not about trading cassava for sesame or trading one raw material for the other. It's about trading manufacturers. That is where money is, So the suggestion that we have always made in the committee at the bank level is that first, let's begin to trade intensely among ourselves and raise our trade from 15 to 18% to 40% over the next 10 years is quite possible. There have been a number of successes, the targeted initiative, there have been the rules of origin instruments. So I believe that Africa should intensify trade among itself. And you do that by removing all the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, custom rules, all of the things that divide us. Because of the single nation arrangement, you find a couple of times they actually tend to override the continental arrangement. They tell you, oh, the rule for pharmaceutical in Kenya or Nigeria is so and so, therefore the other one does not apply. Africa needs to copy the European Union arrangement. I mean, I submit and I agree that they have been around for much longer time, but we don't have to wait another 50, 80 years. Africa needs to accelerate. If we know what is good for us, trade among yourself, convert the Africa continent trade area to Africa production area. That had always been my view. Don't convert it to another area of trading raw material for each other, because all you are going to do is create a zone for everybody to come and dump their goods in. So your observation is spot on, that let us learn to trade among us. Even this $3.5 trillion GDP.
Okay.
That is just the export value of China in 1 year. Just exports. But let's start somewhere.
Okay. I don't know how, you just you told Mokwe now that Africa needs to build wealth. I don't know how they're going to do what you're talking about without having the resources. The president also said every single dollar that leaves our treasury will pay what he calls punitive rates, punitive interest rates, is a dollar that did not go into our steel sector, our textile mills, our agro-processing plants, or our digital industries. Do you think Africa has the resources it needs to build wealth without the West?
Yeah, so now you are talking about the global financial architecture, which had already been skewed against poor nations. And you're right. In the same way that WTO became an obstacle rather than help for poor countries in terms of technology transfer. We have to ramp up support for organizations like the African Development Bank for them to learn more. Remember, when Dr. Addition was there, he raised the capital base from 93 billion to 318 billion in 10 years. The reason was that this money, this 93 billion, it doesn't lend much to nations, and we need to do more. There was great resistance. You need to see the kind of battles to get us to that capital base. The great powers resisted it. They want an Africa that is small, that is crawling on the ground. So the president is correct what he's saying. So when you have all of these obstacles and you lend at punitive rates, again, as he said, it's just going to someone else. And, and there are several other areas of leakage for Africa. that we ourselves must demonstrate the capacity. You know, there are all kinds of flows through all manner of ways that flows. There are those of them that are actually within our purview to deal with. We tighten our belt within to ensure that, the dollar we have stays in Africa. Yes. So you ask about, especially about rates of, borrowing. I always don't advise countries to go do commercial lending and all of this very exorbitant borrowing. Is for me a danger to the nations, and I can cite many countries who put themselves in big trouble, and you enter into all this debt restructuring conversation. Africa should try to enable its own continental banks, EFDB, AfroExim, AFC, to do more, support them, contribute more as stakeholders to this bank so that they can also lend more. But beyond that, domestic resource mobilization is also very important for us. We must do better public finance management among ourselves. If we actually spend money where we budgeted them for, I think we'll see a better acceleration of progress. One of the problems that we have in Africa is also we don't manage our resources very well. Mm-hmm. Whatsoever we have, we need to manage them well. We need to plug the leakages. We need to reduce the cost of governance. And this is throughout all of Africa. Where you see a poor country with all manner of and there are also good examples, by the way. I was in Ghana on April 11th to celebrate with someone, and the president of Ghana came in. We didn't even know he was in the room. Quietly, no noise, no siren, nothing. He just came in quietly. And when we were leaving, we were all leaving together. There was no security people, bouncing people, and we all left really totally impressed. Rather than have a portrait of 50 soldiers and whatever, So let's live simply within our means. Let's cut the cost of governance. Let's pour more money into development. Let's raise our human capital. Let's encourage young people, the youth of Africa. If we enable them, this is the innovation engine of the future, of now. Actually, I don't want to use this future thing anymore. This is the innovative engine of today. Look at all of the unicorns that you have all over in Africa. In Nigeria alone, several unicorns. That is companies that are priced above 1 billion. Money Point income growth, I think, is about 14 billion every year. So we can recreate many of these. There are so many out-of-the-box ways of raising domestic resources. So for me, that would be the way to go.
Prof, we've seen excerpts of the president's speech, and in fairness, the president really went there. I just don't know how many speeches they were able to take within the day. I mean, if you have close to 30 African leaders gathered in one room and one major power in that same room, I wonder if they won't get tired of the speeches. But if our president was able to be one of the first speakers, very much like William Ruto was clearly he's the host. He certainly will be given that privilege and the right to have his own speeches, shared first. But looking at the excerpts from our president's speech, it did appear that he also went there with a very solid agenda to also say what the challenges we're facing are, what we've done at home, maybe I should say what he has done. We're all paying the price, though, for what he has done at home, and what they're actually hoping to come out of this summit with. They're very clear. He says Nigeria is not asking for charity. We're demanding a financial system that intentionally enables Africa to industrialize, to process its own materials, refine its own crude oil. He also addressed issues like migration. He says cooperation must address root causes in countries of origin, people who have jobs, security, and hope at home, do not typically risk their lives on the back of a smuggler's truck. So these are some of the things. The question is, and you've said this before, you don't quite have a lot of hope or optimism on the things that leaders come back with. But this is a speech that is supposed to elicit a certain type of reaction, a certain type of action, so to speak. What do you think Nigeria should be, or Nigerians should be looking at to say that perhaps this conference was different, or this conference is different, and maybe might be encouraged to say, if they're doing other conferences like this, it will be worthwhile, it'll be worth our while to be a part of it?
No, okay, I think leadership, it's a cliche that is true, is by example. The point that you have raised is spot on. Leaders must show example. Leaders must lead the way. And the people always follow when they see good leadership. So after all of the external, and I don't know how many people are actually watching, when you look at the totality of Nigerians, I'm not even sure how many people know there's a summit going on, and that's why I've been saying that for me, it's about what happened the day after, the aftermath. Honestly, I think that, at the end of the day, it's about demonstrable action on the ground, that our leaders will show that they have compassion, that they have empathy, that they have the good of the people at heart.
I was going to say, if they did not have it before they went to that conference, going there is not.
They won't have it ever.
It's not going to change it. But usually when they're going for conferences like that, there's something they tell us. So we're going to go and bring. Yeah. So what do you think we need to see that they brought back from the conference that will make it justifiable that conferences like this hold in the first instance?
You can see I'm struggling too, because it's not the first time. Every year we go for hunger, we go for this, we go for that, and that's why I kept emphasizing that leadership by example. From this conference, Africa Forward. Africa Forward is Africa at the center. For me, Africa should be at the center. Our leaders should emphasize that Africa is already at the center. To say forward means that there was somewhere backward, which metaphorically is. So, but the point is, this is taking place on the African soil, and I would like to see Africa at center stage. I would like to see demonstrable action from the other side also, that they can show that Africa matters a lot to them, because Africa matters a lot for the future. 65% of all uncultivated arable land in the world is in Africa. Minerals, cobalt, lithium, they're all here. But how do we engage ourselves? How do we position our own geo-economics to the point that we can show the world that we care for what God has given us? So at the end of it, it's about people seeing you that you yourself are behaving properly. I want to use that.
Okay, so you want to see African leaders behave better. And you also mentioned that you also want to see the powers do something different. Give you an instance, France. I remember that just before this conference took place, I remember a social media influencer writing, mentioning the embassy of France, mentioning the fact that his passport had been stuck there for close to 3 weeks or thereabout. Fortunately, the embassy of France responded to him and said they could do something about it. And then a lot of people now started responding that, look, our own passports too have been stuck there. So simple things like this, simple things such as even, we're trying to do the proper thing. We're not being smuggled on the back of trucks just to be able to apply and get a visa for a simple visit sometimes can be a headache. Do you think that could be a starting point, for instance? Just say. Prof, can you hear me?
Yeah. it's got stuck a little bit, but it's back now, I think.
Okay, yes, we can hear you clearly. So
I think this is really So this is why I was introducing the concept of geo-economics. Your visa or your passport speaks a lot about how much you are respected. And when you get someone's visa stuck in an embassy for weeks, it just shows the lack of respect. I was actually totally shocked. I met a young man in Accra just 2 days ago, and we were having a discussion, and he was saying, that he's trying to get a Ghanaian passport, a Nigerian guy. I said, but why? He said, because their passport can open many countries. Can you just imagine a Nigerian man, family man, is trying to convert himself to a Ghanaian because of visa? This is a true story. This is 2 days ago. So visa and passport speaks a lot about how much respect you get, whether in an embassy or at the airport, or somewhere, holding in. You've seen someone like Aliko Dangote talking about, he has to take 38 visas in Africa. Not even in Europe. So these are the big obstacles that stand in the way of our trading, our relationship, and we just need to be more aggressive about it. Africa needs to be more among our leaders. They should be a bit more aggressive. We should take more drastic measures to ensure that all of these insults to in the name of our passport, they should stop. So these countries don't respect your passport because you are poor. By the way, it comes back to where we started from. It's poverty. They look at you as poor. This poor individual who is coming here to come and become a nuisance to our country. But when you go there, on the back of a passport that has a strong economic portfolio behind it, you are better respected.
It is true, Prof. We cannot but agree with you that there is work to be done at home, and then we need to be able to build more respect for ourselves so that others from the outside can look at us with respect. Prof, we have to thank you very much for speaking with us this morning. We sincerely hope that your fears will be allayed and that maybe this just might remove the embarrassment you feel about conferences like this. Thank you so much for speaking with us this morning. Professor Oyebanji Oyelaran Oyeyinka is a scholar and researcher, professor in economics, innovation, and technology management. Thank you once more for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be looking at education. Remember that there was a meeting yesterday, about 2 days ago, where there was a policy meeting on education. And the Minister of Education has been speaking on some of the outcomes of that particular conference. We'll be taking a look at it when we come back from this break. Stay with us.